On this episode of China Uncensored, is China pro-choice or pro-life? On this episode of China Uncensored, we'll be looking at China's controversial one-child policy. And I'm sorry to do this to you right off the bat, but I'm going to show you a pretty disturbing image. Disgusting! Look at all those kids! And they all came from one woman. This is illegal. I mean, since 1978, there have been so many hard-working officials trying to keep the birth rate down. And thanks to them, over 400 million births have been prevented. So this woman refuses to be harmonized by the state. But can you really put a price on a mother's love? You bet! This mother's love was worth $1.6 million in fines. Good thing she could afford it, because otherwise... Don't worry, I won't be using any disturbing images. It was unpleasant enough seeing them while I was researching this topic. The best way to get into the China one-child policy is with a story. Ping Liu worked in a factory, and factories in China have a family planning commission that oversees and punishes women who violate the one-child policy. One woman has a second child, the entire factory is punished. So if you were an oppressive regime that totally disregards human life and dignity, how would you make sure women aren't getting pregnant? That's right, you make them register their menstruation cycle and you check every month. If that wasn't the idea that immediately came to you, don't worry, that just means you're a normal human being. The one-child policy was established in 1978. You see, China was recovering from economic boosting policies put in place by Mao during the Great Leap Forward that resulted in a massive famine that killed between 18 and 42 million people. There weren't enough resources to go around, so with a few exceptions, families were limited to having one child. This is in a country that still has no national sexual education, so it didn't do much to prevent pregnancies. That's no problem though, because the main issue authorities concerned themselves with is preventing births. There are reports of women with second or unapproved first children, yes, you need to buy a license to have even one, being dragged kicking and screaming from their homes and strapped to tables to undergo forced abortions. Ping Liu from earlier went through 5 forced abortions. If you're caught with extra children, it's a forced sterilization. These extra children also don't legally exist, so they don't have access to education or health care. It's impossible to find jobs because they have no documentation either. It's the job of 300,000 officials with 83 million underlings to enforce the one-child policy. That's how they have the resources to go into rural areas and check women's vaginas to see if they've recently given birth. I'm sure there's no way that power could be abused. And you'd think if there weren't enough resources, here would be a good place to cut back a little. Then again, the one-child policy is a big moneymaker. You have to pay to have a kid, you have to pay not to have a kid, you have to pay if you have too many kids, plus the cost of birth control and abortion. You even have to pay them to dispose of the aborted fetus. Hey look, that kid's holding an atom. Now, there's been a lot of calls recently to end the one-child policy because it's kind of destroying China. According to the official Chinese think tank, the China Development Research Foundation, the policy has been responsible for an aging population, gender imbalances, a growing shortage of migrant workers, and ultra-low fertility rates. There are about 37 million more men than there are women in China because everyone wants boys, and since you only get one shot at it, baby girls are selectively killed. This has also led to a flourishing sex trade as well as traffickers kidnapping and selling kids. Now, the most ambitious calls for reform would only have made it a 2-child policy, but there were hopes for a little while that it could happen. But as so often happens in China, the government crushed those hopes and reaffirmed that the one-child policy was, quote, a long-term one. So, is the Communist Party pro-choice? Obviously not. And you certainly can't say they're pro-life. I guess you can call it anti-life. Thanks for watching this episode of China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.